The Etymons of Nick Fuentes, Postmodern Reflexivity. We do not always know what we do not know about what we say and do. In the discourse of today's financial backers of research, the only credible goal is power. Narrative define what has the right to be said and done in a culture. The paradox of reflexive agency. On theory, knowing itself and the violence of self-legitimation. Self-legitimation. Every discourse that attempts to explain its own workings becomes a labyrinth whose walls move as we walk. The very gesture of reflexivity rearranges the corridor behind us, ensuring that knowledge never returns to the point from which it set out. Postmodern theory's agony is not that it reflects upon itself, but that it believes such reflection can even conclude. Reflexivity is less a mirror than a machine, an influencing apparatus whose exhaust fumes produce the very problems it pretends to resolve. To resist rhetorical self-scrutiny is itself a rhetorical act. The refusal becomes a meta-narrative that denies its own meta-narrative status, a paradoxical shield built from the very material it devours. Meta-narrative and anti-meta-narratives. The grand narrative of the death of grand narratives is the last grand narrative. The grand narrative of the death of grand narratives is the last grand narrative. A myth of epistemic exhaustion that installs itself as the invisible regulator of all micro-discourses. A silent emperor enthroned beneath the rhetoric of fragmentation. Scientific performativity, the regime in which what works replaces what is true, is not a departure from Enlightenment rationalization, but its final metamorphosis. The moment when the machine gods inherit the throne from the philosophers. The postmodern pluralism of language games is a pantheon of mere deities who believe themselves liberated from Olympus, unaware that the very incompatibility is the new architecture of control. The politics of knowledge machines, performativity as the ruling technique of the late modern empire. When knowledge is indexed not by truth but by circulation, the university ceases to be a sanctuary and becomes an energy grid. Its scholars conduct its concepts, voltages, its disciplines, circuits of instrumental power. Performativity is the oxygen of late capital epistemology, invisible, omnipresent, and required for every intellectual combustion, yet increasingly weaponized, composed into tanks, regulated as a scarce resource. The shift from emancipation to efficiency marks the transition from Promethean fire to data-driven air, a new atmospheric order in which freedom dissipates into metrics and thinking becomes a mere variable in the operational schema. Knowing that we know or do not know as a pathological atmospheric state. The feeling of knowing has replaced epistemology as the governing climate of thought. We live not in the age of knowledge, but in the age of knowledge effects, knowledge anxieties, knowledge hallucinations. The Promethean subject is the supposed savoir without certainty, a pneumatic figure suspended between data clouds and existential drafts, breathing fantasies of mastery through lungs filled with undecidability. Where the grand narratives once promised cosmic teleology, epistemology offers more fragile promise. that our knowing may persist long enough to stabilize identity, even as the winds of unknowing erode the ground beneath us. Every utterance is an apparatus, a machine that positions speaker and listener, carves obligations into the air, and engineers pragmatic relations whose effects long outlast the words they summoned them. To speak is to legislate, to interpret is to administer, to critique is to police the border between language and games. The postmodern theorist is less philosopher than technician of relational machinery. Linkage, the movement from phrase to phrase, is the aerodynamics of discourse. It is here that the turbulences occur, the sudden stalls, the vortices, the catastrophic shifts where genres collide in catastrophic incommensurability. How the university became a theater, and theory is most elaborate performance. The academy has replaced philosophy with dramaturgy, replacing arguments with gestures. Interdisciplinary is often not a dissolution of boundaries, but a managerial tactic, an aesthetic unification masquerading as plurality, an atmospheric homogenization labeled as difference. The postmodern intellectual has become a priest of paralogy, celebrating the sacred opacity of incompatible language games while relying on institutional stability to guarantee the freedom they worship. Difference without infrastructure is merely decoration. Plurality without protection becomes a marketplace where cultures are peddled, not preserved. War on universals in abolishing grounds of justification inadvertently abandons the weak to atmospheric violence. Cultural winds that buffet without guarantee, without horizon, without refuge. To refuse universals is to refuse the possibility of shared shelters in the storm of competing name worlds. The desire for justice becomes another ungrounded phrase, unable to link to any stable ground. The pneumatology of cultural contact, from universal history to gaseous multiplicity. The we that universal history once claimed is now revealed as meteorological fiction, an air mass pretending to be a people, a climatic front mistaken for community. Cultural incompatibility taken as absolute becomes a form of fatalism, a refusal to build bridges because difference has been deified into an atmospheric principle, a sacred wind immune to negotiation. True cosmopolitics begins with the recognition that we breathe the same air, but not the same narratives. Yet the air, unlike the narrative, cannot be partitioned without violence. The machine god of performativity presides over late modernity, a deity whose commandments are algorithms, whose miracles are optimizations, whose priests are auditors and intellectual airflows. Against him rises the mirror god of periology, the trickster spirit of epistemic turbulence, whose play inversions often temporarily rupture in the atmospheric order, though never long enough to build a new climate. Against him rises the minor god of periology, the trickster spirit of epistemic turbulence, whose playful inversions offer temporary ruptures in the atmospheric order, though never long enough to build a new climate. This will definitely put you to sleep. Between these two forces, optimization and rupture, Education becomes a battlefield where knowledge is either standardized into inert atmospheres or volatilized into unpredictable storms. Postmodernity is the moment when theory discovers that it too is weather, unstable, circulating, buffeted by forces beyond its control. The death of meta-narratives does not free us. It leaves us suspended in atmospheric plurality, condemned to drift between incompatible winds of meaning. And yet in this drift that thought finds a new vocation. Not to map the world, nor to justify it, but to sense its pressures, record its shifts, and breathe, despite everything within the turbulence that is knowledge.